So I want to welcome all of our friends to the case presentation from psychoanalysis to neuropsychoanalysis. I thank Dr. Rosa Spagnolo and the Italian group for the invitation to chair this meeting. And I'm so happy to be here, as you can see, with all of you, with Dr. Claudia Spazzi, with Dr. Paul Moore, Dr. Francesco Castelletti Ballara. The only thing that could be better is to be in Rome, I believe, as we were last January, before what I call the Third World War. I'm not sure why Rosa invited me to chair the meeting, but it reminds me of a humble man who opened the meeting in London at the first world meeting of the Society of Neuropsychoanalysis. I don't compare myself to him, but I can understand why he said that. It was the great Oliver Sacks humbly saying he was invited. It was the beginning of a venture that is shaking the psychoanalytic and psychotherapeutic world. Now we are in the beginning of a different era, and I will explain that soon. We are living in a chaotic time, and yet I believe these are times of great opportunities. After 21 years of work, we are at the point in time when we can offer new theory in clinical psychoanalysis, in clinical psychoanalysis, in which the past is remembered and the present provides the opportunities. It embodies what Freud offered us as a theory with his meta-psychology of dual aspect monism, and with Winnicott saying the body remembers being born, meaning the body, psyche, and mind are the same, appearing from different aspects. All this goes against the logocentric Cartesian ideas, yet it can work with the hermeneutic analytic discipline. We had the opportunity to meet the late Paxek, who had landed us with his findings of affective neuroscience, who taught us of the different emotional systems of the brain. I wonder whether I can share screen now. I will try to do that. You tell me if I manage. Wait. Do I? Do I share screen? Do you see me?
Yes, it's working.
Oh, it is working. This is good. So let me just start at the beginning of the share of the screen. Whoa. Just to remind you that there are those 7 emotional systems founded by Jaak Panksepp: the seeking, energetic, rage, fear, panic, grief. We are going to talk about this morning. Play, the higher of all those systems, care and lust. This is the seeking. This is defensive rage. It all comes from animal brain as well. Okay, and this is play. Okay. I will stop sharing so I can see you, otherwise I don't see you here. So, just a minute. With his contribution, with Jaak's the late Jaak contribution, we now know of the systems. We are also grateful for the work of Professor Mark Solms, who managed to bridge between neuroscience and psychoanalysis, and you can see is in his newest published work, re-editing Freud's project. Just a minute. There is a new edit of this paper. We are going to study this internationally very soon. All right then. Solms managed to bridge between the neuroscience and psychoanalysis. Here in our meeting, we will discuss. It is not a supervision group. It's not a supervision hour. It is time for discussion between analysts and neuropsychoanalysis. Time for a peaceful and enjoyable meeting of minds. COVID-19 had shaken all of us. I'm so very happy and grateful to see all of you here. It is no simple choice in these difficult times. Technology has made it possible for a representative from 26 countries to be here, from Italy, Israel, UK, Romania, Latvia, Ireland, USA, Germany, Greece, Portugal, Russia, Netherlands, Brazil, Czechoslovakia, Lithuania, Argentina, Australia, Ukraine, Santiago de Chile, South Africa, Canada, Turkey, Sweden, Croatia, Serbia, and España. It is amazing. And what a pleasure that we can engage in a discussion that can touch and be relevant to all of us without having to arrange our luggage and to lose time at the airport. Still, be at the same time at home and meet. Close and far away at the same time, I ask you please all, can you open your screens and stay with us? It will enable us to have a better time together and for you to be better involved and open to the meeting. These days, I call it a time when walls are falling, when boundaries are changing, when we meet our patients sometimes in their room, wearing their pajamas, as we wait for them in our clinic and we see their children, cats and dogs and whatever not. We cross all boundaries and enter new ones. It is not any more than that we feel safe in our therapist's chair and they are our patients. In one sense, we both occupy the same place, and yet we are able to keep our work going. Sometimes we worry about our health and are afraid to get the virus. There are different days where leadership functions and sometimes does not. We look up and what do we see really in our leadership? The new days and boundaries are set. Google, Zoom, Facebook, Instagram, they are ruling with the help of the people who invested in them and their shareholders. This is the new technological world. The past is remembered and gets reconsolidated with the new information of the present news. Here we are with the old work done by Freud, and we add the newest in brain science to the work he, the genius, had already expected it to become. So let me just do again this amazing thing of sharing screen for a minute, just for you to be able to read it with me. Okay, around 1890, Freud wrote, "We may expect physiology and chemistry to give the most surprising information, and we cannot guess what answer it will return in a few dozen years of question we have put to it. They may be of a kind that will blow away the whole of our artificial structure of hypothesis." And there it is in his paper on Narcissism, he said, "We must recollect that all our provisional ideas in psychology will presumably one day be based on an organic structure." Dr. Rosa Spagnolo, neuropsychiatrist for children, child, and adolescent psychotherapist, psychoanalyst, full member of the Italian Psychoanalytical Society. She currently lives and works in Rome. She is the co-founder of Italian Psychoanalytic Dialogues Association, the organizer of the annual IPD NPSA Rome Conference, and a passionate scholar in the field of neuroscience, with the aim to build a bridge between neuroscientific and psychoanalytic perspectives. She is a member of NPSA, and she leads the NPSA Italian group. She is the author of numerous publications as well as conference speaker and lecturer on neuropsychiatric developmental disorders and psychoanalytical topics. I believe all of you already have her old book, which is Building Bridges, the impact of neuropsychoanalysis on psychoanalytic clinical session from Routledge, London, nominated for the Gratify Award in 2019. And now you're going to have and hear from her about her new book, which is in press, Rosa Spagnolo and Professor Georg Notov together, writing about the dynamic self, Routledge, London. She published also a novel in 2007, Chantal Maremi, editor in Florence.
Good morning to everybody, and good afternoon and good evening, because we have a lot of people coming from the other side of the world. So I go quickly to my presentation because I try to shorten the presentation because it's very long, but I wanted to give you the coordinates to understand this a very rare disease, this clinical case, and my work with this clinical case. I just wanted to highlight something about the self. So keep in mind these dimensions of the self in order to better understand the clinical case. Keep in mind temporal dimension of the self, the geometric dimension of the self, the affective dimension of the self. We are going to talk about this dimension of the self, and I think all of us agree with that typical hallmarks of self are, just to simplify, self-identification, self-location, first-person perspective. I would like to add to this list self-continuity, because in order to illustrate the relevance of self-continuity, I now introduce this clinical case of out-of-body experience. Such disorder, out-of-body experience, is defined as autoscopic phenomena in three forms. Autoscopic hallucination. During autoscopic hallucination, a second own body is seen elsewhere. It's like a hallucination, just the body is seen elsewhere. Then we have the out-of-body experience, and during the out-of-body experience, I'm here, but my body is elsewhere. I see my body elsewhere, but I'm here. This is a form of disembodiment. During the autoscopy, I can see my body here with me and there. I have the opportunity to live, to perceive the world existing in two places simultaneously. So we are interested in this third form of autoscopic phenomena, namely we call this autoscopy, in which the patients cannot decide the location of the body. We call this bilocation, as if it's experiencing to exist in two places at the same time. I don't go through the circuits around these three forms of out-of-body experiences. I just wanted to give you some questions about this embodiment. Where does the self localize during such experiences? Outside the bodily borders? At the location of the physical body? Does the human mind allow for locating at more than one place at the same time? So, with this in mind, we go through my patients. Please don't take any picture, don't record this part, okay? Allora, A is 30 years old, is the youngest of three children. His family is very religious. He defines his family as quiet, simple, without conflict. He was a shy, introverted child. He had few friends, and he had an imaginary friend for many, many years. He had a girlfriend for many years. They saw each other rarely. At 13 years old, he had his first panic attack. At 16, he had a second panic attack, or for better say, a sense of failure. He had to write down in a notebook everything that needed to be done. He is overwhelmed. At this time, he was overwhelmed with anxiety and failure. The practical sense of his family helps him again to overcome this moment. 2 years ago, he starts to have these symptoms that brought him to my consultation room. So he came to me for this unpleasant sensation of being here and elsewhere at the same time, without the full recognition of himself in the present moment, in the here and now. During the consultation, he said, I feel out of space and time. If you ask me what time it is, what day or month it is, and where I'm now, I perfectly know the answer. But it is as if I'm elsewhere, as if there is another me somewhere else. But I know that it's always me. And when I'm doing something, I know that I'm the one who is doing it. But at the same time, I perceive myself elsewhere, as if I wasn't acting at the moment. So I say to myself, come back here. This is who you are, and you are doing this thing. But for a few minutes, I'm elsewhere, and I have no content. I only know that I'm elsewhere and not here. Sometimes he has sudden flashes of himself in the past memory. Other times he's totally lost in the new space. He checks himself, but everything is fine. In order to deal with this situation, he pinches his skin, feels his pulse, counts his heartbeats, performs different workouts so as to perceive his body, even though he still experiences the strange feeling that his body is not with him, but elsewhere. He talks about his long-standing concern for his health, in detail about his pervasive and sometimes uncontrollable anxiety. When he feels his body is not with him, he does not perceive the essential sensation we take for granted. Am I cold, hungry, full? I don't know. I don't understand it. So we decided to meet regularly, twice a week on the couch. His symptoms from the other doctor were read in a different way. Generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, dissociative disorder, and so on. I consider this a self-consciousness disorder. I call the first phase of our therapy disembodiment, the phase of disembodiment. The sessions reveal that A consistently wakes up at night with this fear of having to go through his day knowing he will never be totally present. He is afraid of this sudden interruption of his presence at school and the classroom. He has a strong desire to be alone, as he had many years ago when he failed this exam. When he's talking about these details of this failure, is disoriented, totally confused. He experiences in the consulting room during the session a sort of deja vu, like being a dream, having the sensation this event is happening right now in the session, so I can talk with him about this here and now of this confusion. So I ask questions about being here and now with me in this room, but he responds quickly, carefully, clearly. So my first proposal, work proposal, was to analyze the double time framework. It calls this double reality, in which things happen in parallel. The analysis of this double time immediately reveals his experience of displacement in space. It tells me that when he moves from one place to another one, like just from home to work, from one room to another room, he gets lost because he feels he doesn't know where his body is, whether it is in the old space or in the new space. He doesn't know which space he should live in, here or there. While he's rapidly moving around, he's overwhelmed by this feeling of emptiness in his head. No content, just emptiness. After coming out of this state, he feels distressed because he's unable to dominate the space or time. He associated this anguish with a panic attack he had at 13. But this is the only thing he remembers of this event, nothing else. Sometimes he has not apparently lost his ability to identify himself with his physical body, while sometimes he loses the first person perspective. I have nothing in my mind, I don't know what I feel, I don't know what I am or what I'm experiencing or thinking. This is the first personal perspective, but at the same time, we call this self-ownership. He loses his first personal perspective in this moment by reconfiguring the state of the self according to the space and the time experienced every day. I wake up at 7 o'clock, I go to school, I come back at 12. According to this space and time, he is able to control most of his anxieties. Instead, these perceptive states, who I am, who I'm now, how I'm doing this or not, these perceptive states appear less controllable. According to me, probably because these states are not linked to specific conflictual content of the mind. I suppose they represent discontinuity states of the self, experienced as splits and lacks. In fact, when he elaborates, penetrates the content of his inner world, he is able to recognize his anxiety and phobias. So in this case, in that moment, it is possible to me to intervene on those ones by analyzing his defenses, for example, through dreams. Instead, going into and out of his body without knowing where he is wears him down, and the day seems very long to him. For this reason, he thinks, I should leave my job. I should remain locked in my room, stay in my family, which holding me. By working on getting in, getting out of his body, he learns to recognize a sort of depersonalization aura. So he can look for fixed reference points around him, thus anchoring himself in space and time. We call this his anchoring points. An example. He said, it's like having a different vision of yourself in which you don't recognize yourself. It's a physical sensation. I'm not myself physically, and I don't know where I am. The situation go out of hand. He was in the classroom. I could not control it. A colleague yelled at me, and I promptly, perfectly came back to myself. He gave me the coordinate to get me back into the environment. Through his colleague, he reconfigured the system. He turned it off and then turned it on. We call this my reset. Unfortunately, this reset doesn't always work, and often he has to walk for miles and miles, chasing himself. Literally, he runs in order to reach himself in front of him. He repeats to himself over and over again, now I do this, then I do that. His mental time frame comes through the things he has to do. I think to myself, this is not only control the anxiety, it's the time unfolds through a space that is always physically the same. My room, my office, the classroom is always the same space. But it is time that gives space a different configuration, a different self-configuration, time configuration. So I'll talk about that to him. His answer was, it's terrible because I change together with space and time, and I'm a different person. I'm another person. I perceive myself differently, and I don't recognize myself. It's like being continuously duplicated, or it is as if there is an objective time marked by things to do and a subjective time of my own, in which I'm not in this objective space and time. Our comment is that all this is not unconscious. This is not a primary process. This is not the unconsciousness. This is a sort of clash between two states of consciousness. is aware of all of this. So can we call this different state of consciousness, different quality of consciousness, different configurations of self-consciousness? Our work on space, time, continuity allows us to shift the attention from the body, but the body, the corpus, not the lab, to consciousness, since he says to himself, come on, put yourself up, just wait. I'm fighting against a terrible reality that makes me perceive that I'm not here. My body is somewhere else and not here with me. We call this out of body experience. I'm here, but my body is not here with me. At the same time, we work to allow him to recognize the two types of anxiety pervading him. The anticipatory anxiety, Spagnolo anxiety, he feels when he starts working or taking on a responsibility role. Usually anticipate time in order to control this kind of anxiety. The anxiety that comes afterwards, when he realizes to be elsewhere, that means his body is not there with him. He experiences the discontinuity of the self through this second type of anxiety. How can self-consciousness fix this discontinuity? He got it, he said. I go slowly. I slow everything down, and slowly, in about 50 minutes, I'm present to myself. I can start the day. It's a geometric pattern that I lost, and I no longer find the coordinates of the body and mind together. If I let myself go and move away from this pattern, I feel dizzy, absent-minded, and I'm no longer there. I would like to stress this. Is not afraid of content, object, images, idea, memory, but is afraid of losing this pattern. Once upon a time, he gave himself a pattern by writing everything in a notebook. Now, through the rhythm and the continuity of the setting, we call this not cognitive memories. He can ask himself without getting scared. But what I'm thinking about while I'm elsewhere, he can talk in first person, he can recognize some first person perspective. And he adds that sometimes he finds himself full of memories. He's shifting from the first person perspective to the second person perspective, full of images. And if he had lived another life, it's mine, I'm not split, but it doesn't belong to me. He loses his self-ownership. It's as if someone else had lived it. It's not me. And this then scares me. And I say, come back here. It's you. But I don't understand. It's my body that is somewhere else. And that is why I can't attribute my thought to it. Or is it the mind that is elsewhere? Good question. We don't have the answer. The frustration generated by being rejected by a young woman and this tendency to lock himself up in his room is an opportunity for me to talk about his social inadequacy and his relational isolation. I say, it's like living in a small comfort zone. We call this square meter metaphor. It's room, my therapy room, without ever integrating them into a continuous emotional experience. I can introduce the emotional experience because now he is in the first perspective. And so I propose a new, something new. Don't integrate in many, many sessions, not just in one session. Don't integrate. What does that mean? And we worked at this. Erasing. What does that mean? And we worked at this. And finally, I can say to him, what happened if the erased part then returns as a thoughtless body that is elsewhere because thoughts have been cancelled? The sudden reappropriation of a thoughtless body brings his attention back to his unpleasant interoceptive aspects, such as shaking, nausea, disgusting, being dirty. in his words, for example, the other day, while going from one assignment to another, I chatted with a young woman, and then I felt shaking. I was no longer in me. Who knows where I was? I could not work. I think to myself, I didn't say to him this, I think to myself about the difficulty of getting in touch with the desire and the frustration, the failures. He has, I think to myself, years of avoidance. He works by cutting, literally cutting discontinuity, and by failing to integrate first-person perspective. The restriction of space and time living in this comfort zone means restriction, in Anna Freud's words, ego coartation, ego shrinking of the structure of the self. His small comfort zone built on avoidance works by restricting all the function of the self. I help him to divide and recognize the various feelings, sadness, disappointment, anger. He had not recognized in that moment when he was with this young woman, even if he thought, I erased you, ugly bitch, you disappeared for no reason. He says during this session that he had a date with a young woman who then disappeared. On his way home, he felt he wanted to turn himself off. But this time, he didn't know how to turn himself off. I was sad and felt so sad until the next day. I call this emotional recovery. And when we have this emotional recovery, we can call and we can talk about embodiment, not before. So this disembodied perception still exists, but it is as if the body replies differently. Before, he felt he was elsewhere, and saw his body elsewhere. Now he feels that the body is with him, even when he sees it elsewhere, and he feels to touch it, the body, to be sure it's with him, here with me. It's as if my mind is telling me, you are feeling this way, but then it goes away. There's no danger, I say to myself. It's as if I turn myself off on the one side and turn myself on the other one. Then I feel that the dirt I'm talking about yesterday is an alteration of reality, as if reality contaminates me. I just like to give you the glass transparency metaphor. Okay, usually we don't carry out more work to keep the self separated from reality. Its transparency facilitates our work on reality. We don't need to say, I'm doing this, this is my end, I'm touching this. If all goes well, the structure of the self is transparent. It's the hallmark of the self. It is like glass, transparent and invisible. But if it has a stain, we realize that it exists, the glass and the self, that is between us and the external dimension, which marks a boundary. That stain on the glass self is what he calls the dirt I perceive, and I have to deal with it because I no longer know if it is internal or external. I go on. The dirty feels seems to be the deformed reality, but it is also the deformed self that misperceive realities. It's not the reality, but it is the self that misperceives reality. If the glass is transparent, it doesn't perceive any boundaries with the external world. It looks out from the inside and vice versa, without barriers. If it is dirty, it perceives the presence of the glass and the barrier and the difference from inside and outside. He said, dirt is the words that come and distort the perception of reality. You see yourself and reality as two separate and different things. You see yourself outside and not inside. But also you no longer know if you are looking from the inside or from the outside. The confusion in the yotoscope is total. At this stage of our work, is a new sensitivity to boundaries makes my absence for a week very difficult. When I come back to my office, he says that he felt sick during the interruption. Still his internal organs hurt. His body is sick. He is in great pain like a child. A child. He went to work pretending he was fine, but he felt disoriented. He was totally alienated. His thought was always elsewhere, without a way out. In his words, I was clear he did it. He was aware of this. But at the same time, I answered automatically. This time my mind was somewhere else, with my body somewhere else. And I was like in a dream. The part that was there with me was not me. Then I came back to be me. It was a very strong feeling of alienation. When I was alienated, the pain disappeared. I was absent for a while, and every day something happened. He lost the landmarks. Do you remember my landmarks? Created by the rhythm of the session, by the presence, by my presence, by the physical space of my room. Now that he recognizes the boundaries of the self, and recognizes his body and the external reality, he is afraid of both the internal and the external world, which he experiences as separate and at the same time communicating, and no longer as split and isolated. He talks about this week's dreams. I have dreams where I climb up using my hand. I don't feel tired. It's a physical sensation. Before, I dreamed of failing planes. Now, I constantly dream on climbing stairs, mountains, roller coaster, but always using my hands, feeling my hand climbing. I connect our separation and the relapse of symptoms to the body, now perceived and real, which belongs to him, even in dream dimensions, to the fatigue and discomfort of having to deal with all this. And he adds, I was like receiving a punch in the head that makes you understand you are not adequate, like mental retardation, and you will always be disabled, and you need the support of the other, the supportive family. You try to detach yourself from this, to say it's not mine, but you cannot, and you became anxious. So he can recognize his anxiety. I go back to the fact that now his self and his body work in unison. He tries to manipulate reality by forcing himself into an alienated elsewhere, just like when he had for many years his imaginary friends. And for the first time, he revisits the onset of his whole disembodiment experience. I read just something. When I first had this feeling, I reacted with wish to lock myself up in the room, in the dark, and to never leave from there again. I was scared to see myself elsewhere. It's as if I entered into a time space that has been created together with detachment, and I live two parallel realities. This is the autoscopy. Now I'm confused because sometimes I have my point of view and my time. Sometimes I have the other. And this week in which you were absent has brought back all the sensation of that time, all the bad feelings, very strong feelings, as I refuse the reality in which I have to live. I go. I notice the verbs used between the past and the present. Again, I notice the effort to describe the body that escapes the grip of the mind and goes elsewhere. In certain moments, he still feels attracted by the self-duplication that reduces his anguish. The analytical work, now centered on dueling, occupying his body, leads him to deal with his anxiety. And the following night, he has a recurrent dream, but with a different outcome. This time, he closes all the door of his car to bar a young woman, thief, from getting in. But he doesn't have time to close the door next to him. So the young woman gets in and said, but I'm not scared. We started chatting. She was a beautiful person. I gave her a date and I went out with her. And she was dressed as a bride. She was beautiful. He says that when he woke up, he was happy and he felt happy all day long. I've included this last dream to add the intensity of the transference, the counter-transference, the dream-related transformations, the recognition of the act that have accompanied the therapy, like in any psychoanalytic setting. However, I ask, without the work on the space-time structure of the self and the reconstruction of its continuity, and therefore of its embodiment, I ask, we would have never, I think, had the opportunity to access the contents of the mind that generate at that time the conflict. Thanks. Thank you very much.